sensibilities. Buffalo was a toweringly good band, and it played.
At least you think so.
Oh, well, do we all agree?
Yeah. Dave, why are we doing this here? We should just let him do the interview for us. Now, Glenn, to be honest with you, just how good are Dave Tice and Mark Evans? Really, what do you think? What's your opinion?
Superlative. Absolutely.
So, yeah, there you
Scintillatingly
go.
good.
See? Told you.
But getting back to what okay, now Buffalo
Mark,
arrived.
You weren't going to talk till you got the medal. Shut up.
Yeah, shut up. You won't get your medal.
Yeah, where's the medal?
Buffalo arrived at a time when it was a pretty brave thing to be a band like Buffalo.
Yeah.
It might have worked overseas, but this was Australia, where you really did have to play the pop game in order,
Well, you didn't have to. It was
you were
recommended.
supposed to.
Yeah.
So Buffalo from the outset were a confronting outfit. I mean, and you had a loyal following. It was incredibly strong.
Yes.
What are your cogent memories of those early? I mean, you did 5 albums.
You're talking about the 70s here, mate.
You're talking about the 70s. How are you supposed to remember
it?
What is it that you do remember about your days fronting Buffalo and the following you had and the impact you made?
Well, like Mark was talking about AC/DC before, about how it was very insular. And that was true of a lot of bands, I think, in that period of time. There was a lot of competition going on, and we all were trying to have it was like being in a gang. It was always like being in a gang in those situations. Young men banding together for the same thing. And we were determined that we were going to be an album band.
Yes.
We weren't really interested in making pop singles, and we were very successful at that, actually. Not making pop singles, that is.
Or not having any commercial success.
That, as Mark said, that's relative, because we had a very, very strong live following, and we did sell a lot of albums. The gold on my wall tells me that still to this day. But I think, that as you say, that was an interesting period of time in Australian music, and worldwide really, but especially in Australia, because that was when Australian music really found its own position in the great canvas, and I did some work with a guy called Dennis Walker a few years back over in America. He was Robert Cray's producer and songwriter. And one of the things that he said to me at that time was, he said, over here in America, man, we were always amazed at how ferocious you guys are from over there. You guys really go hard, And I just thought that was always what it was supposed to be about anyway. The Americans were rather taken aback by that, It's,
And that continued. I remember a great anecdote that Jimmy Barnes told me. He said the Chisel went to America. He said, and they've got these well-meaning record company people saying, yeah, you should stand like this and hold your mic like this and throw your hair back like this. And basically you should sound like Foreigner Journey and Rush.
Right, yes.
And Jimmy was so appalled that he came back home and he wrote this scalding song called You Got Nothing I Want, You Got Nothing I Need. But that's always been the way they haven't. Australia does it meaner than anybody does it.
I think so.
It's very right. You've got to look at the American market is what it is, and it's, as far as music goes, there's some great. This is a rash generalisation, but it's like McDonald's. You've got to be able to fit. You've got to be, back in those days, you had to be the next foreigner, or you've got to be the next. You've got to be the next this or that. To the point where there's another great story regarding Rose Tattoo when they did a tour with ZZ Top went over there. And the record company people got them, said, oh, this is great, we've got everything set up for you, we've got a truck, we've got a little tour bus for you, and we've got your makeup person for your tattoos. The record company thought all the tattoos were actually makeup, they weren't real, because that was...
I didn't know that.
That's a true story. And that's what you had to deal with that market, and to this day. But, it's a very commercial corporate market.
Well, the thing about it, the American attitude to a lot of these things is they treat it this bit like a cartoon. You take on this persona, and you're Mr. Joe Blow most of the day, and then when you arrive, you put on your makeup and you put on your long wig and you jump around like a loon. Australians don't take that attitude. What the attitude over here is, if you ain't doing it for real, then get the hell out of it. Do it for real, and that's always been the. The other thing is that the pub scene, which grew up in the mid to late 70s and through the 80s in this country, if you're playing in those places, it's no good trying to be pretending you're something else, because people find you out very quickly. Australians see through that stuff very quickly,
It's not a bullshit.
And in some ways, it's a little detrimental because, you know, in places like England, Europe and America, they expect that their musicians and performers will be somewhat apart from them.
Yeah.
They'll be in a dressing room or in the caravan supplied. In this country, you know, here we are, we play on the stage and then we wander around, and I know most of these people by face or name that are sitting out here, you know, because I've seen them in so many of our gigs, and I know most of them by first name.
They may even owe you money.
None of them owe me
Let's
money,
hope so.
but I may owe them money, actually.
Yeah, that could go with. Okay.
Yeah.
No, I'm saying, but I mean, so what we understand, the best thing really that's ever come out of Australia musically, the one thing we do well, probably better than anybody else, is that uncompromising, harsh pub rock boogie.
Yeah,
it's
right.
probably arrived with Billy Thorpe's Sunbury Aztecs,
For
with
sure.
you know Lobby Lloyd.
No. Started with Buffalo, mate. Come on.
No, but then it included and embraced
That's
and
right.
was furthered by
All these Johnny
Buffalo
come latelys like AC/DC.
and
Yeah.
the young AC/DC. I mean, you created that whole pub rock genre.
Yeah, well, I think it brewed up, you know, for quite a while. Like you know, starting off. I think you start off with the Easy Beats. They weren't a pub rock band, but that's what started that guitar thing. But you know, for a long while, I think, you know, the 60s and 70s, it was, you know, viewed to be a disadvantage to be based here in Australia. But the way it worked out with a lot of bands that started to break through, like Little River Band, In Excess, or even people like Air Supply, you know. Savage Garden, save me. But you know what it is that it was seen to be, it was a tyranny of distancing. It was seen to be a disadvantage here to be in Australia.
Yeah.
I think it's the absolute reverse. I think it was a real advantage to be able to work here in Australia and get tough and get live and do 500 gigs, then go over like AC/DC did, go over to the UK and be this new band. And we'd be playing on a bill with 3 or 4 other bands that are so-called new. They've done a half dozen gigs. They didn't have their set together.
Yeah.
And people say, God, you sound like you've been on the road for 2 years. And we were. They just didn't know about it. So you could ambush people. You could, now with YouTube and the other way, you know, it's probably been shortcutted. Not such a great thing, but I think it was a real advantage to have your band grow up here, then move on to go to the major leagues later on.
Look, there was something. I mean, I can still feel the shivers up the spine when you would go and see Pete Wells on guitar, and roaring guitar, and you would go and see Angus with Bon up on the shoulder. I mean, it was uncompromising in every regard, and you're right. We were so far away from the rest of the world. We could develop under our own standards.
You did an interesting thing too, because Dave would have done the same thing with what everyone else did too. Was you had your favourite bands, and what you did, you learned and played to the standard of what you heard on record, right? And so you got it. You might listen to Led Zeppelin or Black Sabbath or Status Quo, and you're playing up to that level. And then when you go overseas and see these guys, you think, that can't be the same cats playing on the record, you know, because you set your live performance up to a very high level to like recording. And, you know, as you know, some bands sound a bit more ragged live. Yeah. But that's how the bar was set very, very high. So, like I said, I think it's a real advantage to grow your band up here.
The other thing is, I mean, you know, when you look at Australia, you'll see this in microcosm in some ways, because you think about it. Where did Cold Chisel come from?
You mean geographically or
geographically,
musically?
Yes.
Oh, from Adelaide.
From Adelaide, that's right. You know,
probably the best hard rock city in Australia.
Yeah.
As we saw from the Angels last night.
And it's like, you know, there was a scene that developed in Adelaide which was completely separate from the rest of the country.
Yes. The Masters and Apprentices, Twilights.
And it's the same with Brisbane. You know, you can run off the names from Brisbane, the people that come from there. And in another way, people like Dragon come from New Zealand, and each time they're coming from places where they're not part of what is considered to be the bulk of the scene. So you're allowed, really, to develop what you do in your own way in a little microcosm. And then you can take it out and people go, wow, this is strange.
And what was at the centre of those cities, particularly Adelaide, but also Sydney, Melbourne, not so much Brisbane, was migrant hostels. I mean, you're a migrant, you understand that. Well, it was Elizabeth in Adelaide.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Jimmy Barnes was
exactly, and it was
John Swan. I mean, you run off the names. But, you know, this country's been built on migration anyway, you know. The only real Australians
Long may it
are
continue
the
to.
Aboriginals, you know, and, you know...
Well, I'm in Bond from Adelaide. Sorry, from Perth. From Perth.
Oh, yeah, Perth.
Perth.
Originally from, he's a Scotsman from Kirrimuir.
That's what, yeah, the same thing.
Yeah.
One thing I was going to say, the Buffalo albums were released overseas, as I recall, at the time. They've since been reissued. But
Yeah.
didn't Vertigo actually release at least the first or the second one overseas?
Well,
I can remember that
I don't
impressing
know.
me as a youngster
Yeah.
and thinking, wow, these guys are good enough to actually get released, you know, in Britain. And
Well, I didn't really see too much of that at the time.
Royalty-wise.
We won't go into that, Glenn. You know, this is the music business. You're not supposed to be paid for this, you know.
Hey, what?
But you know, I mean, we had at one stage, Buffalo were getting a lot of airplay in New York.
yeah.
Well, is it New York? I think it's the state of New York. Buffalo, the town. Obviously, they accepted
They
us
took
because
to
they
you,
saw
yeah.
the name, and we were getting quite a lot of airplay. And of course, our first thought at that time was to go to the record company and say, "Well, we should go over there." But their attitude was, "Well, you're an Australian band, so you got no chance." And I mean, we only have to look at what's happened in the intervening years to realise how much rubbish that is. But there was this ongoing inferiority complex that seemed to be endemic in the Australian music industry at that time, that Australian acts were just copies of overseas bands. That was never really true, and it's certainly not true now.
I think it's amazing too. I've been doing a lot of interviews for my book in the States, right? And the amount of like heavy rock guys I've been speaking to, like promoting Dirty Deeds, they always mention Buffalo. Because, you know, in the States, you know, and it's...
Did they mention AC/DC?
Yeah, they'd never heard of them much. But yeah, but it's just interesting, you know, like the publisher in the States, a guy called Ian Christie at Brazilian Points, he would go toe to toe with you on Australian music trivia, right? And you even had your own board game.
I had a board game.
And I'm on it.
Yeah.
I'm an answer in rock trivia.
You're an answer.
Thanks for your question. You had I was the answer to.
Why? Did I spell your name wrong? Or
No,
something?
you got
That'd
my
be
name
hard.
right. I said, which bass player was unceremoniously sacked from AC/DC before they broke worldwide?
Well, I mean,
And it was me. I've got a bone to pick with you, Baker.
Unceremoniously. He doesn't
but
like
you were on,
unceremoniously.
look, 3.5 albums.
3 and a bit, yeah.
And you were on the album, I mean, Dirty Deeds, Done Dirt Cheap. You're on TNT, you're on High
Dirty
Voltage.
Deeds. That's a great name for a book, isn't it?
Yeah, you Q. And you were on, I mean, look, they were heady days.
I thought you were going to say you were on drugs then.
Yeah, you were. You're very likely were. Okay,
I was going to take umbrage.
Let's just pick one moment. Being on the flat bed truck going down
Yeah.
Swanson Street
Yeah.
in Melbourne. It's you know, sort of with bomb with the bagpipes.
yeah.
And you know, the city stopping, rather like the Beatles on the roof.
They
of
copied.
Apple.
Yeah.
They copied Buffalo
Oh.
there, Glenn. We did it about a year before they
You did it
down
first.
George Street
Yeah.
in Sydney.
Yes.
Nobody
you see
took
that a
any
lot on
notice of
TV,
us.
don't you? You see, no one knows.
Yeah,
no.
I've got film footage of it actually.
Yeah, but that was an interesting moment. Like it's when you see that old clip now, it's like it was recorded June 7th, 1975. Actually, that thing.
What a
memory,
memory!
yeah,
What
yeah.
a memory!
Um,
He obviously didn't take drugs.
Can't even spell.
He wasn't there in the 70s.
Yeah, but it was just a great moment, and when you look back at the old clip, it's quite amazing because Melbourne looks like a little country town.
Yeah.
You know, it does give you a feel for actually how long ago it was, and now it's getting close to, let's face it, 40 years ago. But the interesting thing about that song, with Long Way to the Top, because it's such an iconic song here in Australia, is that we only would have played it live maybe 20 times. And
Really?
Yeah, because it just didn't. Yeah, with the bagpipe things, it was interesting, but we never really played it, and I'm pretty sure the band's never played it since I got my butt kicked out of the band. So I think 25, maybe the most 25 times the band's ever played it live, and it's such a song you relate to that band, but the band doesn't play it live.
Oh, well.
Yeah. So you've learned something, haven't you?
I've learned. I'm just racking them up. I should be actually
No,
writing them down.
You've got another book coming up now.
But AC/DC were off.